This is the story of my stepfather, Jon Miles, a Vietnam vet and well-known community activist in Tucson, Arizona, who has fought for the rights of the downtrodden his entire life, even as he battles cancer. His activism could be traced back to his experiences in the Vietnam War, when he was drafted into an artillery unit in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. After Vietnam, his labor organizing led to representing blue-collar workers in the mining industry. It led to meeting Cesar Chavez, the leader of the Farm Workers Union, and it even led to being investigated by the FBI. I am Ramon Bannister. My intent here is to document what made my stepfather into the type of man he is today. But in many ways, this is a journey into my own life and discovering who I am. Previously on the Jon Miles Series,
and took us down to the port at Oakland. It was a big ship, great big ship. It was the General J.C. Breckinridge. It was basically a troop ship. So we had, I think we had 36 hours in Okinawa. So meanwhile, I'd mentioned about that whiskey. So I put the word out at the movie that night, because everybody could watch the movie. Other people, I didn't know that if anybody needed any Jack Daniels No. 7, you know, a half pint, I had a half pint for $10. So I wound up selling all the stuff that I had, you know. I pocketed the money, so I had some cash money. So guys would come to me afterwards, you got any more? I said, no, man, I'll pay you 10 times what I wanted. So anyway, we got to Okinawa. So the Marines and all their equipment was going to be offloaded. So they wouldn't let us off until the Marines got off. So we were just hanging around watching over the side of the ship. And one thing that just amazed me was all the beer that they unloaded, you know. Cases and cases of beer in these big things. They had these cranes unloading. So finally the Marines were gone and they finally gave us, we had like basically by that time we had like a 24-hour pass. We had to go in uniform, and beforehand, like they had a lecture to us about places not to go. Of course, that's right away the places that we would go to. But then there was all this stuff that there's going to be people that are going to ask you, oh, where are you going? And blah, blah, blah. Well, we knew we were going to Vietnam, but we didn't know where we were going. So we had a lot of security type things to be wary of, and then be leery of your money. There's people out there that make a living off of GIs, you know, the locals. So that was the case. So basically, when I went, meanwhile, I made some friends, the sailors who were the cooks that worked on the ship. So we were going to go with them. They were going to show us around, because the first thing we were going to do, because you don't get many showers on board ship there, you know. And if you did, it was cold water. So we went to, they called it a steam bath and massage place, you know. So you go there, you get a steam bath and hot water and all that stuff, and then you get a massage. So then we went down and we hit the bars. We did that, and some guys just got stupid ass drunk. There was one guy thought he was gonna die. He almost drank like a whole bottle of vodka. Not a sailor guy. Sailors knew the ropes, you know. And I kind of hung with the sailor guys because I wanted to be careful, you know. But the thing was, you know, I had cash money, and you know, and as soon as they find out you got some cash money, they want it, you know. And I was supposed to, before I left ship, I was supposed to exchange it for military payment certificates. I didn't do it. So what I did, you know, and I had all the money I had. I don't remember how much money it was that I had. And the dollar went a long ways over there. So I bought a few trinkets, a few souvenirs and stuff, and then the Navy guys were going to go back. So I went back with them and then stayed on ship. And the next day, we were leaving. There were still some guys who still hadn't made it back yet. So they sent guys out looking for them. And I don't know I think everybody that I knew made it back, but because there was a chance of going AWOL, So we left Okinawa, and they said it was going to be 3 days to Vietnam. So it wasn't. It was actually less than that. And we went to Cameron Bay, which, wow, it was real pretty. There's nothing but jungle right up to the ocean, But it was evidently it was a big, I don't know if there was an Air Force base in there or what, but we put in this harbor, and they unloaded sold some more of us GIs and some equipment. And I guess they were going to Pleiku, which is First Air Cav. So we just kind of hung around on board ship watching them unload all these huge cases of beer. God, it was these big pallets. I mean, there must have been these big, huge pallets they had. They had this big, cable that lifted them up. They had these big cranes that would lift them over. There must have been 50 big pallets of big things of beer. I couldn't imagine. It was Budweiser, Black Label, Schlitz. There was another one too. I forget the name. It was real popular. It had a bear on it. It was a Midwestern beer from North Dakota, Minnesota. So then we left, and for the first time they gave us live ammo, clips of live ammo, and we had these ammo pouches. We weren't allowed to put them in our rifles yet, though. So we put them. So we had 5 live ammo clips. Hey, and then you start realizing this is getting real, So then we got to Vietnam, and where they dropped us off, really, there was a port there, but they were going to drop us off before the port. So just like you've seen in these movies, here we had 2 duffel bags. We had to take one duffel bag and our rifle and then go over the side of the ship on those rope ladders down to what they call a landing craft. And the landing craft, when it hits shore, the front of it goes down, and you supposedly wade out like the heroes of Second World War did. Well, son of a gun, if they didn't have us doing that, we went down, and some guys are petrified going down. So you'd throw your duffel bag down, and I could climb down. I used to like stuff like that, climb down and get in the end of that landing craft, and we had our stuff, and then they'd take off and take us to shore. But we didn't have to get our feet wet. They took us right up to shore, and they had these what they call PSP, perforated strips or whatever, the metal strips that they now use on the border wall, or they did when they first built the U.S.-Mexico border wall. They used up. We went right up onto that and got off. Never got my feet wet. So then we put clips in our rifles for the first time. I thought, wow. And then they loaded us. So then it was real, man. They loaded us in the back of a pickup or 2 deuce-and-a-half truck. So we were going down the road, and we were ready for action. Of course, then they took us to an Air Force base and dropped us off there. And then you see all kinds of Vietnamese people running around. You see soldiers around, nobody with their rifles at ready. And I figured, heck, man, this is something else. So they dropped us off there, and we all got convened, and then we put up our pup tents. I had my buddy Joe Smith and I, we were 2 halves of a poncho makes into a pup tent. So we stayed in there. And the next day they loaded us up and took us to a staging area. So then at nighttime you could hear boom, boom off in the distance, all these rounds going off. Not rounds, but bombs and artillery. So we dug foxholes, and it would rain. It's not very nice digging foxholes in the mud, but the soil was all red, real red soil, And so you had to dig foxholes in case there was an attack. You get in your foxhole. Your tent was kind of outside of the foxhole. So we were there for a couple of days digging foxholes and filling some sandbags. And what have you. So finally they came and asked for some volunteers that to go from the staging area, go to the area that was going to be our fire base. So naturally, I volunteered, I mean, I was all ready, I was gung-ho, I was going to be G.I. Joe, So I volunteered, and a bunch of us went out there. By the time we got out there, it was getting late in the day. We got out to this old landing strip, and there was a bunch of this concertina wire on it, and that's become more famous now because of what they're doing along the U.S.-Mexico border with concertina wire. But it was real big. It was like barbed wire fences, and these big, huge rolls that were put out. There were two, and then one on top, where it was really hard to get across. And the other side, I guess, had mines in it, and trip flares and stuff like that. So we had as soon as we got off, there was a big mound of soil and all these empty sandbags. So we started filling sandbags. So man, to build up, and we had a tent we had to put up too. I didn't put up the tent; they put me filling sandbags. It was pretty damn hard work, filling these sandbags, tie them up, and somebody would carry over, and they'd build up like a wall. There'd be 2 sandbags by 1 sandbag, like laying brick, but pretty big and pretty heavy, So we did that, and it's raining. It starts raining. So we got the tent up and all that, and we had like a little command post back there. I don't know, but this is where we were going to be staying. There wasn't that many of us out in the middle of nowhere. I figured, damn, suppose they attack us or something tonight, So, so it was one sergeant, Sergeant Soto. He was a staff sergeant. He was a good guy. He was petrified as hell. He'd been in the Korean War. So he knew what it was like, and I kind of kept an eye on him, so at nighttime we were in this tent to stay dry. So I saw where he bunked down. He got right next to the sandbags, huddled up, and then he put his duffel bag like on top of him. So I got on guard duty, one of the first shifts on guard duty. So I had loaded for bear, So wouldn't you know it, it's raining out, and everybody when they're bedded down, all of a sudden incoming rounds. You could actually hear, you could hear the shooting from the jungle area. You could hear it, and then you hear it cutting the air because with the rain, it made the sounds real close to the ground. Holy smokes. So then I had a radio, and then the lieutenant says, I'm on my way over. I said, okay. So when he came, I had to do the halt. Who goes there? I couldn't speak. I was that frightened, Oh, and they kind of finally spit it out and had to do the password and all that stuff. And then he came in and asked, are you all right? And I said, yeah. And said, first, I'd never been shot at before. It wasn't shooting at me. They were shooting about where we were because we had all the light discipline. All this training was coming in. There was no light. So if anybody's taking pot shots at us, they're just taking a guess, So we had all these rounds cutting through the air, So he basically told us what to do, and, don't fire back, don't do this, don't do that, blah, blah. So we survived the night. But that was my first day, not the first day in Vietnam, but the first day in what was going to become our fire base. The first time I got shot at or had bullets whizzing over the air by somebody who wanted to kill me, because in training you get that infiltration courses, you get that to where you can hear it and you live through it, but this was the real deal, So, yeah, that was our first night. This is in our forward base, our fire base. It was only a small crew went out there to start to secure the area. So, and I say small crew, there might have been like 15 of us went out there. So like we pitched a tent, and then the nighttime was kind of scary when you're getting shooting coming in from the jungle areas, coming in. And it was a good football field or bigger length between us and where the jungle was. So after that first night, it was just that time when I was on guard duty when the shooting was happening. But the other thing that was going on at nighttime was you hear all this banging of like pots or pans and, you know, different sounds out there, you know, so kind of like harassment type stuff. So the next day, you know, it was still raining. We filled sandbags to try to secure our position more. And the rain kept up, you know, kind of like what's happening today. It's off and on. And it wasn't cold. It never really got cold over there. But what happened, the sandbags, I mean, it was basically, it was sand, and it wasn't like mud, but it was still wet sand. You know, mud is more of a clay, has a clay content. So it was heavy work. And just to build up where we had a tent where we could sleep in and be secure. And so we then finally, the weather broke. And one interesting thing that was happening, that this area that was going to be our fire base, it was an old Japanese airfield. And the Vietnamese farmers had used it. They were growing rice, you know, turnips, peanuts, crops like that, and it was harvest season, or they had to harvest all that rice and pull their turnips and peanuts and get them out of there. You know, so we had like a break in the concertina wire, or we had like a fence. We would let the people in to harvest their crops, the Vietnamese. So I got assigned to that gate, me and another guy. So what we had to do early in the morning when they came, we had to be there. We had to pull the wire back, and it was a no man's zone, you know, where it was landmines and what have you. So they came in on this road. They had an ox cart, and you know, and they'd fill up with their rice, and it was just basically women and kids. There were no young men. There were old men. So we had to check them out. There was no weapons being brought in, and we let them in, and they went out into the field. And then they'd come back, you know, it's amazing. They'd come back and they call them, I think, yokes, like pole on, and then two big baskets of rice. They'd carry them and they'd dump them into the ox cart. Just amazing. I even asked one of the women one time, let me see if I can carry it, you know. God, I couldn't carry it. I couldn't get balance. Little bitty young woman, you know, just handle it like it was nothing, you know. So I did that for quite a while, you know. That way it got me out of filling sandbags in this other guy. But it was a long day. We'd have to be there so they could get in the morning, and we kicked them out like about 3:30 in the afternoon. So I had a book, Vietnamese English book. So they would all come out at lunchtime, and they had a little fire, and they cooked some tea, and then they had something to eat. So I went over there. I just left my rifle back when my buddy who stayed back at the gate. So I went over there with my book. I was talking Vietnamese to them, you know, or trying to, you know. So it was really quite an experience. They really enjoyed it, you know. And I don't know how long it went on, but it went on for a period of time where, I mean, I was having tea with them, and even one of the women was flirting with me one time. She had killed a snake just as we were out there when they were having this lunch. And it was one of these 5-step snakes, you know, called one of those vipers that you get bit, you walk 5 steps and you fall over dead, you know. Well, she killed it and had it on a stick and kind of tossed it. Well, I jumped out of the way, you know, my glasses went flying, you know, and she got my glasses and started running off with my glasses, you know. So it was like playing a game, and I figured, man, you know, hope the company commander wasn't there, was lieutenants were there. Hope they're not watching what's going on out here. So I made pretty good friends with them. And one thing I noticed, every night they were pot shots coming in, and they were making noise, and pretty soon it stopped. At nighttime it was pretty quiet in our area where we were. I mean, it was a huge area. They had other people there involved. Like we were responsible for 3 bunkers, like on the apex of a triangle at the base. We had like one bunker there and one on this side of the apex and one on this side. And pretty soon where we were on the one on the left. there was no incoming fire anymore at nighttime. So meanwhile, more and more of our troops were showing up, so we had to build bunkers and things like that. So the harvest was going on. So the captain, we had a pretty good captain, our battery commander. He was a West Point graduate, Ranger, airborne, all that stuff. Real gung-ho. But he was my captain in the United States, and we got along really well because he liked my style of dealing with jerks in the Army, So anyway, meaning some of the sergeants that were idiots. So he called me over and wanted to talk to me, about what was going on, with me and the Vietnamese out there. So, and I said, well, I told him, I said, well, I'm still having to, I still don't hate them yet like I'm supposed to, but I figure I'd make friends, and try to talk with them, be relational with them, because they were not the enemy, they weren't the Viet Cong. They may have had sons and husbands that were doing it, but I'm not going to treat them like animals, So he said, So then pretty much, he told everybody, that, cool it, with the Vietnamese, But then pretty soon, the harvest was over, so it ended, and I never saw them anymore. Well, one of the benefits of letting them in, there were the kids, the little boys and little girls. You give them some money, and they'd go into the village and buy you Coca-Cola or beer, or get you some fruit and bring you ice and all that stuff, So they were like our runners, We were eating all this junk food and drinking beer out there, Because that's another thing. There was a lot of beer drinking that, there wasn't really no restrictions on it. They didn't want you getting drunk, but you had plenty of beer. So this went on as we really built up our perimeter. We built those bunkers and wooden framed with all, we got lumber, and we had 3 guys, we call them the carpenters, They're 3 African-American guys, and called them, they were singers. They used to sing in harmony like Temptations songs, I got sunshine, and they were great, but they were building these things for us, and one with Lewis Carter, Grisbeth Brown, and Alfred Lee. They were great guys, and they built a frame, and then we built this bunker up, and we had a roof on the bunker, and we had a little lookout tower on the bunker, on the top of the bunker, and the bunker had that castleization, the bunker, a couple of rows of sandbags high, so if you were being attacked, you could shoot from the top, but otherwise, if it was an attack, you'd go inside. You had openings, and you had 2 M60 machine guns, and you were lined up with the other bunkers, the bunker to your left and the bunker to your right, where you had a final protective line of fire if we were being assaulted, by a huge group of the enemy. We could just set up our machine guns to where there would be no way they could really get in, because our machine guns would be shooting in this direction out, and the other one would be shooting. They'd all intersect, so nobody could really penetrate. Fortunately, we never had to use it, but we were trained how to use it. And then later on, the sniper fire started at nighttime more again, not during the day, but at nighttime. So then we would fire back. Of course, you really don't know what you're shooting at, We had like a tracer with the machine guns, the M60s. Every 5th round was a tracer. So when you're shooting at nighttime, tracers pretty much show where you're shooting at, your line of fire. Once in a while, one of the tracers would go off in a weird direction, but most of the time you'd see. So what I did in my rifle, I had an M14, which we had M14s and M16s, and I liked the M14. They were a bigger bullet, and I could get tracers and put like every 4th round or so as a tracer. So I'm there, and some rifle fire come in, and I'd see where the retort, or where the flare, where the flash was, and shooting, and I could shoot out in that area, and I could see if my tracers are going that way. And then the shooting would stop. their shooting would stop, and then we would stop. So then we kept building that first month. I mean, we never really, once in a while we fired the howitzers, you know, they'd be what they called H&I, harassment and interdiction, where you know, they knew where the enemy was, so you'd fire rounds out there just to harass them, or if they were moving around to interdict them, whatever they were doing. So it wasn't like really coming in any personal contact, but just to keep us sharp on our running your howitzers, you know. And this 105 millimeter howitzer, the barrel was probably so big or so, you know, and the rounds are, I even have a round, a dud round with the fuse, the round, and the casing that it comes in. And after all this terrorism stuff that's going on, I figured if they ever came in my house, a cop had to come in the house and saw that. I mean, they'd have the bomb squad here and all that stuff. So I took the fuse off, I took the projectile off, and the casing, and I put them in the storage room, in different parts of the storage room, you know. So just an ounce of prevention, you know. Not that the cops would be coming in here, but you can never tell. So at that time, I mean, I still really hadn't seen any hardcore combat at all, you know. It was just being in a combat zone, being shot out and shooting back at, you don't know what you're shooting at. And pretty soon they came down, because some guys would go crazy shooting. So the Army came down and says, you know, we're just wasting too much ammo. Only shoot when you need to shoot. And there was something like the figure, if I remember correctly, was that there was one enemy casualty for every 10,000 rounds expended. That's pretty incredible, you know, because it was a lot of waste. Some guys are trying to think they were John Wayne, not even knowing what they're shooting at. Of course, that was where I was, and with the infantry, it may have been different. So we cut back on a lot of this rifle fire. And another thing, too, when you fire the rifle, you know, it was kind of rough for left-handed guys, you know, because when you shoot, you got my rifle, I had a switch. The reason I kept my M14, I had a little lever on it that would make it fire automatically. I could squeeze a trigger, and I could empty a clip with one squeeze. It would go 20 rounds, would go one squeeze. If I could flip it up, and it would be semi-automatic. You shoot, every time you pull the trigger, you get a shot. But meanwhile, those shell casings got to go someplace, and they're hotter than hell, you know. So you got to be careful if somebody's on your right side, and these shells, every time you shoot, I mean, they automatically eject and go out, and they can burn somebody, you know. So these left-handed guys that are shooting like this, they had to learn to shoot right-handed, you know, if they didn't want to get burned by their own shell casings, you know. But the left-handed guys figured it all out, you know, out of necessity. And the same thing with the machine gun. You always had an extra barrel to put on. The barrel, because the barrels would get hot, even on your rifle if you fired it a lot. So the machine gun would get hot, and the barrels were air-cooled. They had like a special sleeve over it that had holes in it. But you had gloves. You had these special glove that if need be, there was one little lever you turned on that M60, and you pull that barrel off that's hot, and you put the cool one on, and then you shoot. That gets hot. Meanwhile, the other one cools off. You just exchange it. But you had to have this glove so you wouldn't get burned, you know, because that, you know, little things like that people never think about, you know, the civilians don't think about little things that can hurt you, you know. Guys get burned pretty severely, you know, just like big burns on their hands, not thinking, you know. And I mean, you only do it once, and it's like when you're a kid and you touch the hot stove, you never do it again, you know. So that was like the first month, the first 6 weeks, 2 months, I mean, we just filled sandbags, built bunkers, put up good tents. We put up a mess tent. We had to dig a latrine. We had all the guns in our battery. And I don't remember how many we had, how many howitzers we had. It's just, we had different gun crews, and I'd say we might have had 5 or 6 that were set up in various positions around there so we could shoot at different levels. Sometimes if the infantry needed a lot of support. We'd have to, a couple, 2 or 3 guns going at one time. The other guys on standby. And we always had a forward observer, and I went out with a forward observer one time, and that's, you go out with a lieutenant that's get trained, you got to do all your triangling everything, all your angles, so you know where to shoot, and then you got to call back into the guns, and you give them a reading, so they adjust the gun, and then they fire around, and then the forward observer has to adjust if the round went too far, too close to where our people were, or too short, then you'd have to adjust them, or if the windage was off. So usually after one round, and you had, like we had, like in the artillery, and the 105s, which are the small artillery, that we had powder bags in the canisters. So everything came like in 3 pieces: a fuse, there were several types of fuse, and then a projectile, several different types of projectiles, and then your canister that had these bags of black powder. So they'd say charge 7, which would mean, I think there was nothing but 7 bags in it. That would be a complete charge. That one, it was going to have to go quite a distance, but if it was going to be closer, charge 3 or charge 2 or charge 4, whatever. So you'd pull out a couple of bags and then shoot. So you had to be real careful. If it was charge 3, you wanted to make sure you had 7 in there, you pulled 4 out. If you left one in there, you would overshoot where you're supposed to shoot, or one less, you'd undershoot. And the infantry was always conscious of friendly fire, these rounds falling short. But you're right out there with the forward observer, you're right out there where the action is, and it's pretty scary. You don't know what to expect. The infantry guys are, and you're never really hardened to the fact that you can get killed. You get these adrenaline rushes. That after the fighting stops, you're a nervous wreck. You're shaking and all that. It's not this macho stuff you're seeing in the movies and all. And then it's also, guys crying and carrying on, and sobbing for this or that, or some guys going crazy. And you look at the makeup of the outfit. We were mostly draftees, and it's just, you can take a high school class, and you can take all the boys out, and that would be like basically the guys you got there. You have people that have different personalities and could react. You have the jocks and the intellects and people like that, and people respond so much differently. And it didn't take you long to realize who was who were the people that wouldn't, hold up under an assault. So we always tried to get them like permanent KP or some job where they wouldn't have to be out endangering the rest of us, or out there doing our job, So it was really up to us. And one thing that brought to mind, we had one guy, I don't remember his name, but we used to call him No Acetol. There's No Acetol, used to be a commercial, but we called him No Acetol because his pants, he had no ass, his pants were always slipping down, in the back. And he was not all there, and we told the sergeants, hell, this guy can't, he's got to be on KP, or send him someplace else. They didn't do it. And one morning we were having breakfast, and when you come in after the night and you're kind of lax, you can see all around you. You come in, you kind of pyramid your rifles when you go in, and you put three rifles together, you stack them outside, and then you go in the mess tent and eat. Well, all of a sudden we're in there eating, and all of a sudden, you hear this shooting going on. Man, so we run out and grab our rifles and happen to look off of our middle bunker, and here's a Jeep out there with a big flag on it. It was the field officer of the day just making his rounds, and this guy, No Acetol, wasn't up in that tower on the bunker observing what's going on out in the field and out on the edge of the jungle out there. So this major started chewing him out. So he was sitting on the ground. He was cleaning his rifle. So he put all his rifle back together again. The major screaming and yelling at him. Puts all and turns the rifle on this major and just blows him away, man. It blew him away. So I felt bad. I mean, they hauled this guy off really quick, the Argy guy who killed him. Then the chopper came in, and I mean, they had to put him this major on a stretcher and haul his ass away, you know. And I never found out what happened to no acetol. The major was dead. The driver was like peed in his pants, you know. He didn't know what the hell to do. So it was kind of like I wanted to go tell that one sergeant, I told you so, you know. Could have been a life. That's what I often wondered. Did this major, was he listed as killed in action or killed by friendly fire? Because that was always a big joke with me, you know. You know, because, you know, after a while you start seeing these people when they want to, like especially your career people, your lifers and your officers, to get promotions. If you get a few medals here and there, it looks good on your resume for promotions, you know. So they'd always doctor up it to where I looked at it where getting a lot of these so-called medals for bravery were just, and they were fraud half the time, you know. In one example, we had an ambush. We used to have to send an ambush squad out in the evenings. There was curfews out in the jungle out there where these villages were along the roads. There was no civilian movement, no movement out in those roads at all. Otherwise, you were treated as the enemy. So we'd send ambush patrols out there. And one night, one of our ambush patrols, I wasn't on it, fortunately, got ambushed out there by the VC. So we sent out a tank. We had an armor unit nearby, and they had these big floodlights on it, and this tank went out. They came to our area. We had to open up the fence for them, the concertina, so they could get out there, and there was a lot of rifle fire. Well, you know, a couple of guys, nobody got killed, but some guys got hurt. So, you know, so they came down, a couple of weeks later, they come down. Well, the lieutenant who was, you know, calling all the shots from inside the command post tent, he was awarded like the Silver Star for bravery. But the guys who were out there getting shot out and getting wounded were getting a Bronze Star with a V for valor, you know. What a joke, you know. What a joke, you know. I mean, if you're going to give a Valor Medal for Silver Star, it's pretty high up. You know, hell, it should be the guys that are out there doing the fighting, not the guy that's in the tent. But I told his lieutenant, well, it doesn't work that way. If it wasn't for us working in the tent, those guys would have been this. And, yeah, so it was just a big joke, you know. Some guys would even, when we were getting fired on, would even, you know, try to wound themselves somehow, you know, you get a Purple Heart and do things like that. So it became a real joke, you know. And then you had malingerers, you guys, and then you had guys that just couldn't handle it, you know, after a while. Because there is a lot of tension. Although we weren't having like the Viet Cong come and attack us. I mean, they weren't coming there right in front of us to shoot us. I mean, but they were close enough in artillery. So, I mean, but this was just rare occasions. This wasn't an everyday thing. And my thing, you know, before I went to Vietnam, I got, in the States, I got reduced. I was a PFC, and E3, and I got a reduction in rank to E2. So I didn't have any stripes at all. So I was pretty well seasoned after 2 or 3 months, and we had replacements come in, sergeants and corporals and Spec 4s and things like that. So I would lead an ambush patrol to go out at nighttime, and some of these new guys would have to go out, you know, for training with us, because you didn't want to have too big of a group. And we had like a walkie-talkie, so to speak, because we weren't that far away from our command post, from our area. So these sergeants and these higher-ranking people were all pissed off that, well, how come he's taking us out? He's the private, you know. So they would tell him, look, you know, I mean, you go out there, you'll get everybody killed. You know, if you take a group out there, but if he takes you out there, you're going to come back alive, you know. So better go out there and get the experience before you start trying to pull rank, you know. So I felt pretty good about that, you know. So, I mean, I would take him out, and guys liked to go out with me. And fortunately, we never had we never had to interdict anybody. We'd go out there, and it gets kind of cool at nighttime. You take a poncho with you, you take your weapon, and you got a first aid kit, and you got your ammo pouches and grenades and stuff like that. But you just take a poncho, so I had the guys, we'd go out there on these roadways and trails. We'd take shifts, and we could sleep. So, but some couple of people always had to be awake. So we had that. So then, as soon as it was getting around daylight, because we'd go out just as it's getting dark, you know. So then, and then we'd come back because we didn't want to reveal ourselves to anybody that was out there. But we had to be able to see to go back and forth, you know, because they could booby trap it or do something, which never happened. Other ambush squads did interdict people. You know, they took them as prisoners and turned them over. We had an ARVN compound at our base there, our fire base. But ARVN is Army of South Vietnam. So we would turn any prisoners we had over to them. So who knows what happened to them after that. And then only one interesting thing happened when I had an ambush patrol. We went out, and it was just getting, you could tell almost twilight, you know. You can just see the sky, and all of a sudden there was this river out there. It wasn't a big river, but it's one we used to just wade across. So, and it was kind of the end of the rainy season. So, and it rained somewhere else, but like here, you know, when it rains, it can rain over there, but the flood can happen here. So one of our ambush squads was on the other side of the river. Well, they were under fire. So we got the call to go there and back up, to be backup. But you know, you have to be really careful when you're going there because you're coming in from the rear to help them. And they knew we were coming, but you can never tell. Somebody hears something, they may turn around and shoot at you. But when we're crossing the river, I was the second one across the river, and all of a sudden I hear, "Help, help," you know. And the river, what happened, and it didn't dawn on me, and I'm the squad leader. It didn't dawn on me. The water usually was above your knees. This time it was up about your waist, but I had all my gear, I had everything, and I got across the river. But my friend Mitchell, that all, you know, he was reluctant at first. I can't swim, and I said, "Don't worry about it. We've crossed this before." So he went across and he lost his footing, and he falls in the water. So then, "I can't swim." He starts yelling, you know, and all, "I can't swim." So I went after him in the water, and fortunately I took my web gear, everything off so it wouldn't get wet. So I just threw it on dry land, and then I went in the water after him, and I got him. So I caught him. He lost his rifle. He still had his web gear on. He didn't take it off. I don't know why, but it was all wet. So I dragged him there to the shore. So meanwhile, everybody was gathered around there. So we got on the shore, and then meanwhile, what happened with the squad that was on had been under fire. I guess the situation resolved itself. That whoever was going after him retreated back into the jungle. So we stayed there and waited for them to come back. So Mitch, you know, I was a hero. I saved his life, and you weren't going to die, bro. You know, he's afraid of the water. And he was an interesting guy, too, as it turned out. He was one of the guys I was friends with. I wrote a story, The Tale of Two Georges, back one time, and it was when George Bush was there. And this is deviating a little bit. But Mitchell's, I got a letter from his mother thanking me for saving his life, you know. So I said, yeah. So it turned out Mitchell was, he was a black guy. He lived in the oil fields of around Midland, Texas. And that's where George Bush grew up at, Midland, Texas. So that's when I made this story, The Tale of Two Georges. But he had his father was killed in the oil fields, and he was the oldest boy with 4 sisters. So he decided to join the army so he could send money to help support his family. So that's why he was there, you know. So So I wrote up the story, I mean, because I was the tale of two Georges, because his first name was George. So it's the tale of the two Georges, George Mitchell and George Bush. You know, George Mitchell, poor family, goes, you know, to help his family. His father just died in the oil fields, and George W. Bush, his family made billions of dollars off the oil fields and never got his feet dirty, you know. So that was kind of like the story.
It's interesting to note the kinds of pictures that Jon was taking, let alone the fact that he took a camera in the first place. Because even now, most people don't take cameras to the battle zone. But he did. Now when you look at the photographs, you see that he took pictures of the Vietnamese people, the farmers. It was as if his opinion about the war was changing little by little, and he didn't even know it. In the next episode, you'll see how his opinion about the war solidifies by the time he leaves Vietnam.